Okay, and with that, I will say thank you everyone for keeping your audio, your microphones off during the presentation. I want to encourage you to use the chat feature to log any questions that might come up as we progress through the presentation. Our speakers will watch the chat box and will address those questions when there's a natural break. And at the end, we intend to do some open Q&A. So then we will handle those by a raise of hands using the raise hand function. And we will open up the microphones for some live questions at that point. So with that, Kellyanne Gallagher, CEO of the Commuter Rail Coalition, thank you once again for joining us, and I will turn it over to Andrew, Ryan, and Devin.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Kellyanne. And I'll just reiterate that point. We do intend to leave time at the end for Q&A. So although you can see the agenda there, and there's quite a few things we're going to cover, we're definitely going to not talk over the entire hour that we have. Hopefully I'm coming through all loud and clear. Let me just run through how we plan to kind of run today's session. I'm going to start off at the start, really, with just that overview of what this regulation is, picking out some of those, the important aspects of the regulation. Then we'll look at some of the key dates that are in there. And obviously, following on from that, what are the implications for the commuter railroads with this new regulation, which is coming in? I've added one item to talk a little bit about something called LVVR. Some of you may know what that is. That was the Canadian audio recording regulation, which was implemented 2 years ago. So there's some insights that we got from that, which may be of interest to the audience. And then what might be a short section, but we're going to talk a little bit about what the FRA may have kind of added since that regulation came out, and then move to the Q&A. So the idea is that with Ryan and Devin, I have strong lieutenants to kind of help us kind of make this less boring than a FRA regulation kind of event could be. So let's kick off with the requirements. Now, I'm sure everybody on here has seen this. This is a screenshot from the actual FRA publication of 229136. Just in terms of terminology, the locomotive image and audio recording devices, I think is the formal term that's used. What we also hear is this referred to as the FAST Act. So FAST Act being the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. That was a DOT initiative with hundreds of various kind of elements on there. And this was actually included as part of that a number of years ago. Has now become this FRA regulation. So this regulation is only for commuter and intercity passenger rail operators. So if there's any freight operators on here, then you might find this less interesting. So there are 10 parts to the regulation, and probably 7 are the most important. The remaining 3 are a little bit more boilerplate, but the key 7 are the ones that we're going to look at first of all in terms of what's in the regulation. And just to say what they are, first one is what it is that is supposed to be recorded using these devices, what devices are required, so outward and inward. The protection, this is actually talking about ensuring that various cybersecurity rules are in place for this information which is captured. Inspection, testing and maintenance of recording devices and what's required of railroads for that. How they are handled, so chain of custody, dealing with reporting to the FRA when there's accidents and incidents. And then a really important one, which is the actual approval process that the FRA have stipulated for getting compliant with this regulation. And then, as I mentioned, there's 3 other areas as well that are included in this regulation around repair and other laws and controlling the disabling and interfering with the equipment. And really, I think we'll let you all kind of go into the detail of those outside of this event. So the way I've done this, I've got a page for each of those top 7. And essentially, I've just wanted to highlight what are the key information to just try and make this as digestible as possible for everybody. So this is affecting the lead locomotive and requires outward-facing and inward-facing recording devices. Obviously, where there is a dual cab locomotive, that requires both cabs because you will have one of those in the lead at any one point. There is a key date which is included in the regulation, and that is that October of this year, any systems which are installed must meet the requirements. And there are some important references here relating to kind of getting approval before something could be installed, which we'll come on to shortly. So that is a date, obviously, very, very close to us now. The other important date is the date that all vehicles covered, so all commuter and passenger locomotives must be compliant, and that is October 2027. The other core element that's included in this Part A, which essentially is really the summary, is that a minimum of 12 hours of the most recent operation should be recorded. And the final area, which is really key, is you're not only recording the information, it needs to be retained to ensure that the FRA is stipulating that it's recorded on a memory module. And that media should be meeting the same requirements as a certified crashworthy event recorder. So I think everybody on this call is aware of that requirement and obviously already complies with that with event recorders. So that is stipulated in this regulation as well. And one other area really around the overall for this is audio systems is referenced here. And essentially, although not stipulated as the requirement, but if audio recording is also included in your solution, those same October dates apply. So nothing new installed. Sorry, anything new installed after October of this year must comply, and everything must be compliant by 2027 if it's audio. I think it's fair to say we probably won't talk about audio again in this presentation. It is all really focused on the video, the recording of images. Okay, so first of the recording systems is the outward facing. Most locomotives really today will have an outward facing or forward facing camera already. And I think the requirements that they've got here really in terms of kind of what it needs to be looking and capturing center line of the track and capturing signal aspects will probably already be compliant with anything that's there already. They've stipulated a minimum frame rate of 15 frames per second. Shouldn't be too prohibitive with modern cameras which are installed. And also indicated that it should be capturing switch points 50 feet in front of the vehicle. Where the regulation becomes more prescriptive is around kind of what's capturing during different lighting conditions. So what's capturing daytime. And it suggests nighttime with illumination from the headlight is sufficient. So the basis that the headlight always has to be active suggests that's not going to be an issue. And then there must be time and date stamping of all of the recordings that are being made. And then the final point is, if it stops working, then the vehicle needs to be removed from service. So essentially, that means identifying if this is still operating. And that is why there is a separate part we'll come on to about monitoring that the system is still working. So I'll just talk about the inward now, and then I'll perhaps invite Ryan or to comment on any of this from your perspective from an operator. So on the inward side, again, a lot of locomotives at the moment will already have a camera in the cab providing recording. The regulation requires that it covers the area where the crew members are positioned and also provides a recording and coverage of the instruments and controls on the vehicle. The resolution should be sufficient to record their actions. And they've actually stipulated a lower frame per second than we had for the outward of 5. I've got some examples of some images with higher frames per second, but 5 should be more than once.
No, we have to.
Yeah, sorry, just ask it. If everybody can keep on mute for now, we can kind of, we will have time for questions later or use the chat. The lighting within the cab is probably more challenging than with the forward facing. So ambient light when that is sufficient to actually meet the resolution requirements. But at night, the requirement is, or in poor light conditions, that there is an automatic switch to an infrared. So there is a night view, so recording can take place within the cab. And then similar to the forward facing, all of this recording must have time and date stamped of recordings on there. Interestingly, the FRA have stipulated that if there happens to be a bathroom in that cab area, then that does not require recording, which is probably a relief. And then similar to the forward facing, any failures of the system would actually require kind of vehicle being removed from service. So so Ryan, that kind of is like the headlines in terms of the devices. I'm not sure if you wanted to kind of add anything in here before I move on to the other parts.
Sure, I think thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. So I think one part that the regulation of the proposed language is certainly missing is how to introduce an inward-facing camera into a locomotive cab, into a workforce that typically is probably not used to that camera bolted to the ceiling, watching what you're doing. And I would strongly recommend to those operators who are on this webinar today, really start to think about how you're going to message this out internally to your crafts. That is probably the bigger challenge beyond actually equipping a locomotive or figuring out how to factor that into your spare ratio. If you have a system that doesn't work, how do you still cover the trip? But there is a huge campaign that has to go with this to get your crews on board. Some systems will proactively tell you if someone covers over a camera, you know, and I will tell you that our experience here at MBTA, we get out well ahead of this regulation. We started to equip several years ago, even prior to the FAST Act, just because we thought it was the right thing to do. We saw some value. We did a lot of demonstrations, and for years we only had 2 locomotives equipped. And you fast forward to now, and we are significantly ahead of the regulation. And I will tell you that the first time these systems validate good behavior, your workforces will certainly see the value added by these systems, rather than stare up the ceiling and say, well, they're just looking over my shoulder. You know, I used to always talk to union leadership or the workforce about the fact that, look, I have 1,000 things to do every day. I would love to just stare over your shoulder virtually, but I have stuff to do. So it's important to build this out as this is a value added. This is not a gotcha moment. It will catch bad behavior, but the idea is that there is no bad behavior, but it'll also catch good behavior, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ryan. I'll continue through to the other remaining parts. And then we have some examples of kind of some in-cab cameras, kind of what that looks like. And I know that's used a lot for training or just kind of advice to crews. So, you know, they're aware of what's there. So on the protection side, so the FRA have stipulated that they don't mind how you download this information. There could be an analog type, actually connecting a physical wire to the recording device to get that out, or it could be one of the more modern wireless, that means kind of remote systems which use the web. One of the things that they do say though is it's very important that unauthorized access is prevented. Now, if it's obviously it's a digital wireless one, then cybersecurity measures, etc., are required as part of that. In terms of inspection, testing, and maintenance, so we mentioned before that devices must be removed from service if they're not working. The device also should have, or shall have, so it will have, a self-monitoring feature to assess that it's on and also that it's operating properly. And that will also form part of the annual kind of test regime as well, including taking sample downloads. So an important factor here is whatever the system is, that self-monitoring needs to be part of whatever's going to be put into the solution. Now, handling of the recordings, a chain of custody procedure. Clearly, this is nothing new to railroads handling FRA downloads information from the locomotive. But just reiterating again, a lot of the wording here is what you'd see under kind of part 335 on the event recorder. But where there is a specific accident or incident, the FRA, there's 2 points here that I pulled out. One is that obviously where this needs to be reported to the FRA, they need to be able to not only take your recording, but be able to read it. So they have basically said, doesn't matter what the platform is, software, whatever you're using, but it needs to be in a format that's readable by them. So again, it's another factor in terms of solutions that you're using for this. And the other one is kind of preservation of it. So it is a minimum of 1 year. The FRA, as everybody's probably aware, often do ask for longer than that. So it's ensuring that that can be preserved. In this section as well, there's a number of different recording uses, such as railroads can use it for their own internal investigations, and there's various controls around that, which goes into quite a lot of detail. And then the last one that I wanted to really pull out on the regulation is around the approval. And I will ask Devin as well to kind of just chip in on this section as well, from your experience of working with the FRA and what some of these dates and requirements will mean for commuter railroads. So the first thing to say is that the FRA is requesting a description of the technical aspects of whatever locomotive recording system is going to be installed or maybe already exists, which complies with this regulation. And they pulled out those 3 core areas of this regulation. That requirement for a minimum of the 12 hours recording capability. That's that previous 12 hours, which would be up to an incident. The crashworthiness aspect, so that's meeting those FRA certified crashworthiness standards. And then the ability for them to actually not access it, so receive it and then read it. And so those are the 3 areas that they've called out as crucial in anybody's submission that takes place. And then we get to the interesting thing about, well, how does this process work? So the FRA have requested that this statement is submitted at least 90 days before your new system for compliance is installed. Now, clearly that means building that into whatever kind of timelines required. It also means it's only once the FRA have reviewed it that they can approve it. Interestingly, there is also wording in there for existing systems. This is kind of, I think where, Devin, I might need your help on this, because this is a date that's already passed. This was January of this year, where essentially, because it was 60 days after the rule coming out, they asked that railroads submit information about existing systems they have and their level of compliance. So I don't know, Devin, you're probably a lot closer than I am in terms of where that is and what the FRA's maybe hit rate was for receiving those.
Yeah, well, if you're on this call and you're wondering if you should have submitted it, if you didn't, then don't worry, this didn't apply to you, right? This was more for those that had working systems, that had already put in systems and wanted to be considered compliant under this requirement. So for that, it would be interesting, and we have a slide later that's going to do a little bit of Q&A for those that did submit this to the FRA before the January 13th timeline, or even after that for new installs that you're working on or might be working on, if you've heard any feedback. So to Andrew's point, this is something where, especially for the first few properties that go through this, there's going to be a lot of questions about what do you need. And it's going to be a learning curve on FRA side too, right? Whenever you're trying to implement or execute one of these regulations, even when you write the regulation, you're not sure exactly what you're going to get and how well that's going to be communicated or understood by the regulated community. So, and here they give you three main bullet points, but it doesn't tell you what demonstrates compliance with those points, right? So you got to do a little bit of thinking, a little critical thinking about how your design can be demonstrated, especially if you haven't actually installed it yet. So in any of these, these are the three main points they've brought up, but it doesn't mean that's the only thing they're going to be looking at. So you want to back it up to what are the primary requirements, performance requirements that the system must meet. And there's outward requirements and there's inward facing requirements. So just breaking it down to the basics, what is it supposed to do? And how would you best be able to demonstrate that your future installation would be able to meet it? So in that case, most of what we're looking at here is, let's take something, for example, the ability to see a switch 50 feet in front of it in different lighting conditions. If you have exemplar installations that mirror what you're planning to do, whether it's from Ryan's Railroad or somewhere else, great, right? You can use that to kind of demonstrate how it would look on your system and what it would do. Locations within a cab for the inward facing to figure out what perspective you're going to get and what ability you will see for the different crew member positions, which basically is engineer, fireman, right? Those are the two spots that you're worried about, because those are the two people that could have some traditional effect on the train. And most of the fisheye lenses that are common now have a pretty good view of everybody in that cab. But be able to demonstrate that you can meet the requirements of seeing the engineer's functionality or functions and actions, as well as if there's an emergency brake on the side of the fireman, any actions that a conductor or somebody else sitting in that seat might take. The crash worthiness is pretty simple. That's been around for a while now with event recorders, both for traditional locomotive event recorders, but also PTC. You should have the data from whatever your supplier is in terms of its crash hardened memory module. There's a whole list of specific tests that have been around for a long time that they'll be able to provide. And you want to make sure you have evidence of that, just so that you can provide that as well, because that's important. That's one of the most critical features here. And, as we talked about, I'll add some extra parts here, to Andrew's point, 90 days. That doesn't mean assume 90 days is going to magically pass and you'll get some approval and you can just start your installation. All you project managers out there, make sure that you build in some time, not only for, maybe it's not 90 days, it's 100 days, 110 days. Or you might get a response with requests for additional information, or they may say, hey, this is great, but it doesn't do X, Y, Z the way it was intended to, or the way we were expecting it. So give yourself some float in there to make sure that your design is correct. I mean, the bottom line here is don't wait till you're 90 days out to make this submission from when you want to make the installs on your fleet. Make sure you're planning ahead. And that's where it gets back to not the dates on this slide, but the earlier date about new system installs after October of this year. That's going to be the one that really starts to hit most of you at this point. So anybody who's installing camera systems up until October, it's just the way you've always done it. Do whatever you have under your existing contracts. But for any new system, and the word system is key here, because it doesn't mean if you have a defective event recorder that's there today and you're replacing it with a new one, replacement, that's the entire system that has to be approved. That's just regular ongoing maintenance. But when you put a new system in, that has to now meet the requirements of this. So if you were going to jettison your camera and your event recorder and put a whole new system in, that's going to have to, at this point, if it's after October of 24, you're going to have to meet this requirement to submit the information 90 days in advance before the installation starts and get that approval. So just be on the lookout for where you are with any long-term procurements, fleet replacement projects. So not only with your existing fleet, any plans you might have for upgrading systems on the rolling stock there, but also if you've got new vehicles coming online after 24 or October of this year, make sure you're planning for this as well in terms of getting that installation. A lot of those systems installations will occur later, so it's something you might have time for, but this will sneak up on you if you're not careful. Andrew, any other points on this one, or?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I just emphasize the fact that, you know, it does require approval before installation. So that building that float, like you said, in there. The only other thought I had, Devin, I mean, obviously with your role with the CRC, whether or not it's worth building maybe a directory of a kind of who is doing what within the commuter rail community, because there may, you know, it might be good to know kind of what may have had positive response from the FRA. I think you mentioned before, seeing what feedback we've had.
Yeah, and we'll hit that. We can talk about that on the slide about FRA responses. You know, I'm assuming it's going to be pretty light for that discussion, so we can talk more about what we can do, particularly as CRC is a resource to the railroads here.
Yes. Okay, so I mentioned there's other requirements. Obviously, they're important. They need reviewing. You need to express compliance, but, you know, I'm not going to go into the detail in that in today's session. And actually, as Devin has just been saying, there is a number of key dates here. So November the 13th is when this rule came out, and January the 13th was this, 60 days after, if you think you're already compliant, sending a response. But that date of October the 12th this year is really crucial, particularly if there are plans at the moment, you have installs going ahead, then, you know, actually meeting that requirement means it's FRA approved for install. And then, of course, that end deadline is not that far away, particularly if you have a large fleet. And reiterate there as well, the FRA say 90 days, but it might be more aspirational than reality, and that might just be for an initial response, not necessarily you know, the final approval. Okay, so in terms of what does this mean for commuter railroads? And so in this section, I've really tried not to do a sales pitch, as I promised Kellyanne, but what I wanted to do is just give some examples of kind of how these recording systems can work, and how they meet a number of these requirements if there is a compliance gap. So what I've done, I've taken a few of the parts. So for example, on the outward compliant, the outward facing camera, as you can see there, the center line of the track, distinguishing signal aspects, there's no switch points on there, but viewing those 50 feet out, the minimum frames per second requirement. So there's a couple of examples here. Ryan has kindly allowed us to use some images. This is taken from the Watchonic system of a couple of his vehicles. I think, as you can see on here, we have, you know, the actual date and type stamp as well, another part of the requirement that's there. Forward facing, probably pretty straightforward. Inward is where we get it more interesting. We've got two images here, one during a daylight, one with a night vision view. Complete coverage of the cab. Typically that means using a kind of fisheye 360-degree type camera. And if people aren't aware of these images, I mean, they can look a little bit unusual.
You're gonna love that.
Difficult on the eye to see. I've got a very quick kind of video. This is just showing how this works from, actually, I'll carry that playing. Yeah, so this is kind of just taken from Wytronic system, where we kind of got one of these images on here. And as you can see, the fisheye itself can be manipulated. So you literally go in and drill down into it, see, obviously, great visibility of all of the controls and the panel there. And I'm sure anybody that already has a 360 camera kind of has that already kind of an ability to view it. This is kind of what the screen looks like on Wytronics where you view that. I don't need to watch that again. Now, one factor on the inward compliance is certain vehicles will have a design which could still make a 360-degree camera a challenge. The example I've got here is from a cab car. Some of you might, well, be able to tell which kind of fleet this is from. And the reason I use this as an example of just kind of ensuring compliance is this particular vehicle, as you can see, kind of has a panel on the inside of a column. And that could be an issue for a 360-degree camera. It might require a second camera, or it might not require a camera at all, because these might not be important signals that are required by the FRA. So I think there's a number of factors here. Understanding whether what you have already is compliant or what you're buying is going to be compliant. And then maybe even building a case to say, yeah, we know this doesn't cover this section here, but actually we don't believe it's required as part of the regulation. And I'm not going to do any more on that comment. So the next one is really kind of this point about keeping the minimum of 12 hours of operational data. Now, with fixed systems, so I mentioned that the FRA allow you to kind of just plug into a device. Typically, they're very limited by the storage capability and capacity that they have, as well as just, it's not the easiest thing to be doing, actually getting access to the vehicle. So that is why more of these kind of wireless or remote systems are increasingly becoming more popular. The example I've got to give is a Wytronics one. It's the only one I kind of have access to. But I wanted to show a very short video, which basically shows kind of how this works, and essentially is storing 2 to 4 to 6 weeks of this video information, which is all there available, can be viewed online, which doesn't involve actually going to the vehicle and finding a specific area. You can actually look across the whole time period, select a period to download. So I'm going to show this video and then maybe ask Ryan to talk a little bit about kind of how this could work. So if I just set this going here. So just so everybody understands, so this is the Wytronics portal, just on the internet. You can see this is my browser. I selected an MBTA vehicle, chose a particular time slot. So I went back a week ago. I just recorded this yesterday. Now, Wytronics is a remote diagnostics as well as a video recording system. So for this particular vehicle during this time period, as you can see, we got all the various signals, hundreds of various signals. It starts off with speed at the top, and then it provides a geographic location as well. So, and with a key showing whether the vehicle is moving or not and the speed it's traveling. And then really critically for this particular presentation, we have a camera views as well. Now, what this enables us to do is replicate what will be a video recording. So we can just start this playing. At the moment, this is playing at a 5-second feedback rate. You can see on the map the vehicle moving. So it's picking up speed. So it's gone from yellow to green status. On the signals, you can see that speed increasing. And obviously, you can see the visual of that as well. And this is all capturable as an output that can be saved and shared, or just a link can be shared to be viewed online. And because there's obviously an inward camera as well, can click the camera view. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner, moving actually into the cab. It's a 360-degree camera, which enables some manipulation. Now, this is a moving train, so kind of this is video that is actually moving at the moment. What you'll see in another video is kind of what happens when we actually look at this in more detail when it's still as well. I mentioned that this was a shareable asset. So essentially, systems like Witronics are able to just click and it provides a link. So everything we're just seeing now can be sent. Someone can just click on that link, providing they have access, of course, or permission to view it. They'll be able to view that exact screen. That can then be captured, etc. So Ryan, it's very hard to try and show this on a screen, but I know you're a user of this system. Whether you've got a kind of a comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think having all of this data, sort of a one-stop shop. I mean, we've all been there where you wait for a road foreman to go out to the field, and maybe you already have an outward-facing camera that you now need to physically download off the locomotive, you know, in person, and then a separate system to pull a download off your event recorder. And then you go back and you spend kind of hours trying to match everything up, time it to the actual event. And, you know, having this full view of your event recorded data, as well as the actual visual images of outward and inward, allows you kind of to get to the end of the story in minutes versus hours by the time all this data gets pulled, brought back, analyzed, and then you get a report traditionally 2 or 3 days later, if you're lucky. You know, I think that the insight this gives also allows you beyond an incident, but just performance monitoring. You know, this is a valuable tool to overlay all of this data in one screen, one shot. If you want to switch assets, you know, change locomotives, it's a stroke of the mouse. It's very, very straightforward. You know, and again, we use this as a tool not just to investigate incidents, but more so to validate the good behavior that we see, the proper train handling. You know, you get a noise complaint about an engineer excessively sounding the horn, right? What the caller doesn't tell you is, well, actually, there are a bunch of kids, you know, playing chicken with the train at a crossing, right? Or they'll cross only in a quiet zone, yet there's people walking right in front of the train. The caller never tells you that part. They'll just tell you, oh, the train blew its horn way too loud. You can see everything going on to allow you in real time to answer that. I've had people on the phone and I just say, hold on, give me 1 minute. I'm going to look to see what happened. And the credibility that that can bring to an agency or to an operation, I think speaks volumes to the fact that this regulation is not necessarily a gotcha. This is a very useful tool to stay proactive with how you communicate with all your outward stakeholders. And I'll just add, I am not I'm not super into complicated technology. This user interface is simple. The learning curves that come with, say, proprietary software, you know, for some of the older event recorders or even video systems, where the learning curve is tremendous. It's just not here, and I would just recommend to all the operators, go for simplicity. And if you can get all this information from one user interface, your workforce will thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. So just keep an eye on the time. I want to make sure we have at least 15 minutes at the end for questions. So I might kind of rush through some of these a little bit quicker. So again, the self-monitoring element. So one of the things that you get with this type of kind of cloud-based wireless system, such as Witronics, is this example again, is that you can do the self-monitoring. So for example, this is identifying there is some obstruction with cameras. And when that happens, an alert is kind of triggered. That actually generates an email, which will immediately come out. And also when there are alerts, they can be configured so that an actual video clip is automatically recorded anyway. So literally you get an alert, you go in, you click the click, you click that link and you can actually see that recording. And I'm going to kind of go through, this is an example. So all these different events and alerts. So sorry, Ryan, I kind of again chose MBTA here for a number of different events and alerts that took place. And again, it's all part of the requirement that when there are events that happen. So imagine having a system which then automatically kind of alerts you and then kind of makes that recording happen. So this is another video, an example As you can see, there was an event that happened there. The little camera icon says, yes, a recording has been made. And then you have the recording. And you'll just see on the right-hand side, just before a car impacts the train at this grade crossing, which was the incident which happened. So again, using the Witronic system there. And I've got one more video, which I'll just quickly show. And this is where, again, where we have another incident, which took place at Braintree. Vehicle 2033 we captured. There was an event, therefore it's identified. Ryan or someone in his team will have been indicated. They would have been sent the link to kind of see this video clip, as you can see the green one there. And this is what they would see when that kind of plays through. They've got the information, the train location, obviously the associated signals. And then just to show you quickly, this is the video kind of recording. I mean, at the moment, I'm just doing this from the website. So by just accessing, you can see this yourself, or actually go and see the actual video clip that was recorded. And as you can see, with the incident there, it's quite obvious, a motor vehicle encroaching on the grade crossing. And with the inward camera as well, it means that we can, and we can share that if we want to make sure that Ryan did see it. And then on the inward, so we have the inward view there. As you can see, we've kind of got, just that quick snapshot image. But what really we got the value, I'm bringing the cursor back to the start of this particular incident, and then we play again, and you can see now that view in the cab and the engineer there, obviously already reporting this this incident. So enormous kind of coverage in terms of what can be provided. And like I say, this shouldn't really be just an overhead for regulation. It's maybe an opportunity of getting a lot more operational training, whatever information. So really my penultimate slide here is something we've spoken about a lot, which is timeline. And, I think Devin as well made that point. Enable sufficient time to really get solutions in, particularly if you need to be buying something new. RFPs do take a while. Suppliers such as Witronics, we can't just turn these things around overnight. There is a degree of building, and of course, there is a lot of install that needs to take place. So actually estimating the times for that. And what I haven't got on here, of course, is the FRA, 90 days minimum, that I think should really be applied for looking at kind of how long this would take. So I'm sure a lot of commuter railroads are already kind of well into looking at this. But really just a reminder that, that November 2027 is just over 3 years away from where we are today. Okay, I wanted to do one last question before we kind of one last point before I open this up. And that was to talk about this regulation that was implemented in Canada in September 2022. It's not exactly the same as this FRA regulation. It was for both passenger and freight railroads for a start. And so the passenger rails in Canada, as you see the picture there for Via Rail, and also Amtrak, because they operate cross-border, needed to be compliant in September 2022. Now, there's an element in the Canadian legislation which is different to the US one. This has kind of been talked about by the FRA, but is not, as far as I can see, in the regulation. But Devin can keep me honest here, and that is the requirement for randomized testing. Because of this requirement in Canada, that meant that all the systems that were bought had to have that ability to do a machine-generated random kind of testing. And something like 10% of the fleet has a 30-minute video, which is submitted to Transport Canada every month. Now, one impact of that is, for large fleets, that's a huge overhead, almost impossible if you try and do that if you have a wired system. So we really saw this interest in the wireless digital systems, such as the example we just gave from Witronics. because that has this random generated testing in there and kind of has a lot more flexibility. It's not involving people going in the shop and making manual downloads. A couple of other takeaways really from the Canadian one. Canadian requirement was a lot stricter than the FRA one. In the cab, it required a view of the engineer, as well as other areas in there. Typically, there's more than 2 cameras required, even 360-degree ones, which made it a lot more of a heavy requirement. After a year and a half of being in place, I think it's fair to say that probably the main behavior changes that kind of has been reported is there's a lot more awareness amongst crews, a lot more awareness that kind of, you know, the things that are being monitored, the actual recordings are used as training for the crews as well. So again, I guess it's a positive because this is building safety, but it's something to kind of be aware of, that there's a tool that will be available. And then the last one is in Canada, unlike the FRA, they didn't enforce approval beforehand of any systems. So they didn't ask you to submit 90 days in advance the approval. What that led to was that vendors, such as Witronics, essentially had to go to Transport Canada. We kind of talked to them about what our solution was to look at that, its compliance. So we kind of helped the rail industry understand more about, well, what was compliant, what wasn't, whether this was, because otherwise they would install and, you know, potentially not have that checked by Transport Canada. It would be essentially once the requirement was in place. And I'm, you know, pleased to say that has actually worked quite well. Brought a very good relationship between the rail industry in Canada and the suppliers of such systems. I think that was kind of it. I know we talked about FRA responses already, so really, I think we can move. We've got at least 12 minutes for Q&A. I'll just say on here, on Witronics' website, we've got some areas in there which has got a lot more detail about the regulation and how you can be compliant. So, you know, without selling too much, I'm sure other suppliers have got similar things, but that is there if anybody is interested in it. So I think what I'll do now is probably stop.
Well, and Andrew, if you want to pull up the chat to look at the Q&A while you're doing that, I could just add a couple points that we didn't talk about. Just one, be aware when you do venture into the world of being compliant, there's a couple things you need to be aware of. So if you're an existing system and said you're compliant today, or if this is occurring anytime after October of this year for anybody that's putting in a new system, keep in mind that there are inspection, testing, maintenance requirements, as Andrew kind of alluded to in some of them. So you do have to make sure you're performing those inspections on your new systems once you're compliant. There are failure provisions that go along with that in terms of what you can and can't do. You know, previously, when you didn't have a mandatory safety system like this, if it broke, you know, you had your own discretion to continue operating or do whatever you needed to do. Especially if it was just covering your liability. Most railroads had its own policy in terms of what it would be, what it would allow itself to do. But now there's a CFR, you know, 229-136 E1 talks about specifically what you can and can't do in terms of if a system has an issue. And then also keep in mind there's a new blue card that goes along with this. So your locomotives, your cab cars, you're going to have to download the new blue card because we love making more paperwork out there. It has its own number for some reason, just for this aspect that's going to have to mark that it's equipped. So if you have multiple fleets, some of which are getting equipped at different times, have fun with that nightmare of an administrative process. But just be aware that it is out there, and that's an easy, low-hanging fruit for an inspector to come out and check to see if it's checked or not, or you have the right form there if it's supposed to be equipped. So.
Okay. Hey, Devin, can I just throw the first question at you, which is from Rich Garden? So could a pilot system be installed before FRA approval?
There's no reason it couldn't be, especially if you're trying to get information to provide to FRA, for example, or your own sanity check. If you read the intent behind the regulation, the approval process, it was really to save railroads from making an investment in a system that they wouldn't have considered compliant. And so the idea is before you start equipping your fleet, you get buy off that, yes, it meets the needs there. So for example, if the crash hardened memory module didn't meet all the loading scenarios or different scenarios that are required, yeah, that wouldn't be a compliant system, and you would have spent a lot of money on hardware that you may not be able to use. Or as we talk about remote capabilities, that's going to be very different, right? The provisions for that, there's some specific concerns. There's a lot of flexibility and capability with remote storage, but there's specific concerns they're going to be looking at, especially how does it, to making sure there's no loss in transfer of data from the locomotive or the cab car to the remote storage system, and the ability to keep that data from being corrupted over time. So be careful there. That's the intent, is that before you make an investment, you have the okay and then start mass producing. But if you wanted to put a pilot and location in just to do a sanity check, as long as you're not operating it as a compliant device, then I don't see any reason you wouldn't be able to at least make some pilot installs, get some preliminary data, and help that inform your package that you're going to submit to the FRA.
I would caution any operator to just think about the actual install process, right? I mean, it's a fairly, no matter what system, it's intrusive to a degree. You have wiring harnesses, cameras to install, any other interface ports, or any manual download ports. I mean, and that has to be thoughtful, right? Because you go through the expense and you drill a bunch of holes inside the cab of a locomotive, and you decide you want to change it. If your mounting patterns don't match, if your cable runs are different, if the cable spec is different, you've just added another wire loom that, quite frankly, we don't need any additional wiring in locomotives. So just be thoughtful. Be thoughtful.
Okay.
Exactly.
So,
And if they say don't put it in that location, you don't want to have drawings and engineering ready to go for installation of 1,000 of them, right? So if you want to do one before you proceed with the finalizing and design, that usually makes sense, right, in the engineering world.
More standard your fleet is, the better. I mean, Andrew, you talked a little bit about earlier about control cars, for example. Now, we operate a mixed fleet of control cars, and in some applications, that single fisheye camera covers what we need. I have some control car fleets that doesn't quite get everything we need, and we spent a lot of time moving cameras to different angles and what works and what doesn't work. So the more pre-work you can do to measure twice, cut once, I recommend it.
So the next question is kind of related to this, and so from Christina in North County, and also Dave as well at Denver's got a kind of an add-on around it. If you already have a system installed that's not compliant, would it be okay to install a parallel system that is kind of intended to comply? And potentially the existing system might even need to be retained to keep the new one, but you are installing a new compliant one. I'm not sure if you can see the question. It might be easier than my description of it. I don't know, Devin, you might be best to kind of have a first stab at that.
Yeah, Christina, it's a good question. Trying to trip me up here, but it's kind of a gray area in some ways. I mean, the requirement is a duty to equip, right? So after these dates, and if you're installing a new system after 24, it has to be compliant and meet the requirements, and has to meet all what we talked about in terms of inspections, failure use scenarios, having your blue card updated. If you're considering an optional systems, there's no restriction, so to speak, if you have additional optional systems out there, but you have to be careful because you can have some overlap where this reg may preempt other potential installations, particularly when it relates to the inward facing cameras and what you can and can't do. So I'd be careful there. I mean, it's not to say that if you're not, like we talked about earlier, if you're trying to pilot something out and figure out if your locations are right, or if you can use existing systems as part of a more compliant system, that in that time frame, that makes sense. But you want to be careful that you don't have too many systems that might conflict with each other in terms of the intent of this regulation. I'd be particularly worried about the inward facing camera, right? If you have something, it's hard to really make a distinction between what was there before and what's there now. And why would you really want to maintain two systems, right? For the length of it. Different purposes. If you have like interior systems for the passenger coach in general, obviously those are for a different purpose. It's not intended to meet the requirement. But it really depends on what the point of having two systems in parallel would be. If it's just to kind of get you to a fully equipped point, or you don't have your systems all up and running, that may make sense. But be careful there in terms of what is parallel and what's making sure people know what's compliant, what's not. Crews would have to understand when you can use a system and when you couldn't. You know, if you have two different cameras, how would they know which one was broken, which one they're allowed to continue operating with, which one has to go back after that date and get repaired? So you could get yourself into trouble pretty quickly there. So there's no explicit prohibition. Like I said, it's a duty to equip, but I'd be careful there unless there's a real reason to have two systems operating in parallel. And the second question, if you have an existing system, is this the one you're talking about, Andrew?
Yeah, the two seem linked. Yes, yeah.
Is it required to use an existing system until a new compliant system can be? No, I mean, you have to have a compliant system or not by the deadlines, right? So if you have another system there today that's not compliant, it's for whatever use you have it for today, right? It doesn't need to continue in operation. But by the time you hit one of these dates, you have to be compliant.
I would double down too on Devin's point about being careful, right? Because if I have two, say, outward facing cameras and I'm a public agency and there's an incident that results in litigation and the video footage from both cameras gets subpoenaed and the timestamps are off by 2 seconds, I'm setting myself up for just a mess that I don't want to have to defend. So my own recommendation would be if you have one that works and is compliant, but you still have the other one, I might remove the other one. Just maintain one. I mean, we struggle with the resources we have to maintain what we have. One is straightforward, but yeah, dangerous water.
So Kellyanne, we just got one more question coming from Stephen. Do we have time to just take that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so from Stephen Williams, working with the new train set procurement for Caltrain, assembly of new cars will continue past October the 12th. So this is the new cars being delivered. How is the installation date of the recording system defined for new locomotives? David, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, they don't parse words. It's any new systems being installed. So I kind of see what you're saying. It's not a new system, right? Your system has been installed on current equipment. That's something you'd want to make sure is clear with the FRA in terms of how many additional cars might be out there and what you would have to do. I mean, I certainly can't speak for them. They wouldn't, whether or not they would be recognize that as an existing system that's continuing to be installed, or if they would want everything that's put in on a new piece of equipment after that date to be compliant, or what other options you might have. That's a discussion that would be best had with FRA just to figure out your specific scenario and what your options might be or how it might be interpreted.
I would say, I mean, they may, and a big maybe, offer up a waiver, some sort of relief, but I would, if I'm coming in to inspect your property, I'm looking at the calendar. And if the shall be equipped by date has passed, I would expect that whatever is coming into service or in service past that date is equipped.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reason I hedge against saying, I mean, first off, if you did need a waiver, you want to start that process now, right? Because it's not a fast process. Two, you also have to be very careful on what they're going to approve and what they're not going to approve. There may be perfectly logical reasons from a railroad operating perspective and why you might be afforded one. But there's a lot that goes into providing relief from existing regulations. And so best to have discussions with them first and figure out what your options are and then proceed with that. But they're not, the whole intent of this is to provide information to be compliant with the FAST Act and what Congress passed down, right? So they're not looking at ways to get you. I'll say that. Even the approval process, it was really intended to make sure railroads weren't making investments before they knew they had a compliance system, and you know, you'd spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, and suddenly somebody said, "Oh, that doesn't work. Now you got to replace your entire fleet and get a waiver to do the time frame to do that." So they're not trying to get you on anything here, but yeah, some of these odd situations like this, they happen with any regulation, no matter what you try to do in terms of timing. So talk to them first and see what options you have available at your disposal and what their perspective of it is.
Devin, who should people talk to at the FRA? Can you give some specifics on that?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, this is an odd one, right? Because it's technically 229 as the physical equipment characteristics and the duty to equip, and that's motive power and equipment. So I'm sure they're probably the ones that are looking at some of these documents that you're sending in. It says MP&E on the email. But there's also an operational side to this in terms of what the inward cameras are doing, what it can see on the outward camera. And so the OP specialists, I'm sure, are involved as well. I've never really gotten a good answer in terms of who to go to directly. I have some that I can double check to see who would be the best contact. But I would start with your regional, we used to call them regions, whatever we call them now, safety management team, right? You've got safety management team 1, 7, and 4, whatever they are now. So your Steve Illich and anybody else that you normally contact as your go-to for the railroad. Start there. They're your best point of contact for any question like this. And they'll get you hooked up with the next person in line to answer the questions. And I'll do some digging. And if I get a specific name for this, I'll certainly pass it along to the group here.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gentlemen, I don't see any new questions in the chat. I don't know, I didn't ask you at the start if you've got a couple more minutes, if you want to see if there are any questions from the group still on the phone, if they want to raise hands. Don't want to impose that, but we've still got 35 people on the phone listening.
Means Devin didn't put him to sleep.
That's why I didn't talk about any of the regulations. And if Northern Indiana's out there, right? I didn't write this, so you can't blame me for any of this, right? Let's just be clear on that.
All right, I'm not sure she's still on, but anyway. All right, I don't see any hands raised, so I'm going to say thank you, Ryan, Devin.
Thank you.
I appreciate what you've shared this afternoon. I've learned a lot, which doesn't say much. There's a lot to learn here. And I just thank you for putting this content together and delivering it in a way that we can share it with Commuter Rail Coalition members and others, non-members. I know we're on the phone as well. So I hope everyone in this realm has benefited from today's talk. And we'll be posting the recording online in the next few days. So if anyone missed anything and wants to a replay, that'll be accessible to everyone. So thank you again.
Yeah, and Kellyanne too, for our members, if the railroads, especially if you do have any questions, if they want to reach out to you and pass it along to us, we're more than happy to provide some insight from our side to resource, right? That's CRC, what CRC is for, right? Is to help our members. So.
Right. Thanks for that offer, Devin. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.